I'm joined now by Ayo Johnson, an analyst in African affairs. Ayo, difficult to know the truth in the situation about why these three people in that mobile phone video were being subjected to this treatment. Were they really part of the plot to assassinate Kamara, or indeed were they witnesses, or were they being punished for some part in the massacre back in September? What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are definitely that I think more than likely they were military and they were being taught a lesson to ensure that that doesn't necessarily happen again. Because as you know, there's a massive crackdown currently where large numbers of people are being arrested, including civilians, that must say. And what you see there, the three people that you've mentioned, it's not an isolated incident. Clearly, some people are finding themselves in far more serious situations like that where they've actually been killed altogether.
How easy is it to get information out of Guinea as to what is happening to people?
It's very difficult. The juntas have actually ensured that they clamp down on everything. Most people are indoors. People are scared to come out. Those who actually come out are easily arrested and quickly intimidated. I'm afraid it's a worrying time for most Guineans currently. And of course, the juntas are trying to send that message that they're tough, they're in control, there are no splits within their umbrella, and it would appear that there might be.
But are there divisions behind the scenes? I mean, presumably everybody, with Kamara out of the country, there is a power vacuum. There's no doubt about that, as Yvonne was saying. Is there splits within the military junta about the way forward, who should take control? I mean, who is running Guinea at the moment? Well,
Kunate, clearly. But the fact is that the person who shot Kamara is in hiding. Clearly, he's been protected. And you've got those factions within the military who are protecting him. So clearly, they're not actually talking with the same voice or speaking under the same umbrella. But we've got to be mindful that the impact of what Guinea does from now on has ramifications across the region, and that's very serious at the moment, and that's a very serious concern for many.
Indeed, what is the effect is the instability in Guinea going to have on the wider region? I mean, many of its neighbouring countries themselves aren't exactly the most stable countries in Africa, are they?
Well, Guinea, including that of Sierra Leone and Liberia that are close, are fragile states coming from wars and instability for some time. And what you do need is stability. And clearly, Guinea currently, the fashion they've operated over the last year and more so over the last couple of days, is an indication that everyone's going to be very, very nervous. I think the ECOWAS and that of the African Union have to actually impose some serious measures against the Guineans and actually show that we can't accept this. And of course, the Guineans have actually walked away from talks that were happening in Burkina Faso simply because they don't want to go to the ballot box in January. So it's a concern all around.
Well, first of all, would the Guinean junta react favourably to any interference or any sanctions? I mean, how would they respond? And secondly, I mean, you talk about the African Union. The African Union is not exactly known for getting heavily involved in disputes like this, is it? Do you think that's likely to happen? Well,
they will have to, because it's got to that stage now. I mean, we've had soft sanctions that have been imposed on the juntas. We've had smart sanctions whereby they've curtailed their ability to travel, curtailed their bank accounts and so on and so forth. But it's not enough, clearly. The juntas have got to understand that we've got to lead on to the ballot box. We've got to have elections in January. It's very important that the Guinean people have a say, and they've got to stand down. And the problem that we have currently is that they're not prepared to do so. Walking away from the talks is an indication that they're not prepared to they're not prepared to relinquish power, if one were to put it that way. And this is just a method of them extending their position in power, and it's wrong altogether, because the Guineans are suffering, and more so, it's making their neighbours all very nervous, very, very nervous.
Indeed, Ayo Johnson, wish we could talk more, but we're out of time. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on that story. Thank you.
A police chief in Pakistan said
as things were looking a little calmer in West Africa. One person who can address this is African affairs analyst Ayo Johnson, who's joining us from our London broadcast centre. So let's start off with that question. What impact can this crisis in Guinea have on the neighbouring countries?
We can't downplay how important this situation is. I mean, clearly the neighbouring countries, both of Guinea and Liberia, especially Liberia and Sierra Leone, are fragile states. And it's very important that the presidents of those countries, especially Ernest Bai Koroma of Sierra Leone and that of President Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, actually understand that the impact of Guinea can actually spill into their countries. So it's very important that they take a very important lead on this and ensure that through the ECOWAS and through the Manor River Union, they ensure that they apply the right pressure on the juntas for them to relinquish power and for them to call for elections, which are due for next month.
Because even more worrying, Kamara, before he was shot, was building up an army of mercenaries drawn in from neighbouring countries. If these talks in neighbouring Burkina Faso fail, what impact is that likely to have on tribal links, for example?
Well, absolutely. That's devastating. I mean, the fact that Camara was not very confident in the army in terms of the support that he was getting. He was actually fueling and funding a militia group in his own country, which was being trained by mercenaries. Of course, that's just to show how important it is that these talks that are happening in Burkina Faso actually go ahead. Clearly, the junta had actually said they wouldn't take part any further. They've actually come back from that decision and decided to take part in these talks. All the ambassadors from all the European countries and that of the United States actually making their way to Burkina Faso as we speak to ensure that those talks actually have some level of impetus. The purpose of that talks was for them to be some level of mediation between the juntas and the opposition, for them to have some level of power sharing leading on to elections, which is so crucial at this junction. It's so important because you've got...
Sure, sorry, so excuse me interrupting. As you said, there was a doubt whether these talks in Ouagadougou were indeed going to go ahead. Does that suggest then that there is nobody in control now in Guinea, that there is nobody running the government?
Well, I mean, we must say that Camara actually tried to control his military. I mean, clearly he's not in the picture at the moment. Konaté, who's the deputy, has taken control. But really, we've got different factions who are clearly not supporting him, which is why we've got this massive arrest which is going around where they're arresting a lot of military personnel, a lot of individuals who they think were part of the plot initially against Camara, just to quell and ensure that the people that remain actually support the juntas. But it's a difficult task all itself. I mean, the individual Dekaits who actually shot Camara himself is in hiding and clearly being supported by elements within the army. So it just shows how volatile the entire situation is and how difficult it is for anyone to govern Guinea at this junction.
OK, what about those on the street, the locals? I mean, what impact is this having on them? We hear awful stories of the military, divisions within the military, those in the military rounding up innocent civilians.
Yes, absolutely. That's a fact. That's been happening. In fact, the military has been going one step further. They've been trying to silence those who they know would have stood against them in terms of the investigations that are currently happening by the United Nations, as opposed to those atrocities that happened where large numbers of civilians were killed back in September at a rally at a stadium. So they're using this opportunity to kill off, silence, and get a lot of the individuals who would cause a lot of problems for them in the future. But I think it just shows that the juntas are not prepared to relinquish power. They're not prepared to head for elections, which are due next month. And if those elections are to start, we've got to have the process starting now, whereby ballot papers have got to be, and we've got to have the Electoral Commission, and for all interested parties to take part in these elections. And we need to apply the right level of pressure, and that's got to come from ECOMOG, the ECOWAS, I beg your pardon. It's got to come from the United Nations, which we're clearly hearing at the moment, and it's got to come from the European Union. And this is needed quite urgently. It's very important that the rest of the world apply every single level of pressure on these guys, because they clearly are not interested in peace, and they're not prepared in terms of going back to the ballot box. We need Guinea to see it through and ensure that elections take place next month.
OK, we'll be keeping an eye on that. Ayo Johnson, thank you for talking to us from London. Some other stories in brief now. 19 miners have been killed in northwestern Turkey after an explosion caused a cave in